You happy,
Well-
Martha?
Thank you. Yes, I shall begin.
Good. No, it's great you're here. We just want to hear a bit of your story and yeah. So whereabouts were you born?
I was born in the Ukraine,
Ukraine.
and I came to this country when I was 9 years old. Through the war,
What war?
the Second World War,
Wow.
and I'm actually, how can I say, born in the Ukraine, but I am German. We
gonna
always
ask
spoke.
that.
We spoke an old dialect, which was flat German. We
As
didn't
opposed
speak. We
to-
didn't speak Hitler's German.
Right.
And flat German is a very, very old language, which I found out many years later because my husband used to always say, "I think your mother made that language up." And I says, "Come on." So anyway, he read it up. He looked it up. He was a great reader and said, "I've got to apologise to you." He says, "That language," he says, "actually Dutch and English was made of that."
Wow. So actually, Dutchy's like flat German.
There is a lot of words in it.
Wow.
Plattdeutsch was a language that I spoke with my mother until through the war, as I say, I was only a year old when my father died and they took all the men. I never knew my dad.
Oh wow.
And they were, and her brothers and all the men from the village, they were shot. They took them all from the villages
Were you brought up in a village in the Ukraine?
in the Ukraine. But the
Village.
people all in the villages spoke flat German.
Right.
So they were little farmers virtually that grew their own
Right.
produce.
Right.
They would have cows, chickens, ducks, and grew their vegetables and made their own sunflower oil. They would dry their own fruit so that they would have enough over the winter when, there was no fruit about.
Was Ukraine back then, was it part of Prussia or the Soviet Union or?
Well, it did come under communism eventually.
Which was
Which-
Soviet Union, wasn't it?
Yeah. And then you had to, all the people had to do so many hours work. Everyone had to be on an equal.
Right.
There was no rich and there was no poor. That's what they were trying to get to.
That's the major selling point for communism is everyone's equal,
Yeah.
I think. Sort of a,
So my mother had to go in the early hours to milk 11 cows by hand.
wow.
And then in the evening again.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I came from 6 children. My the eldest, or the second eldest, I should say, his name was Sasha. My mother spoke of him. He died at 16 months old. He had German measles.
Wow.
And it turned to pneumonia. And in them days, there weren't any doctors and hospitals about like there is now. So he died in her arms when she was feeding him.
Wow.
And so I'm one of 6 children.
What number are you?
I am the second last
Second last. Okay. So you were 9 when you moved
when we came to this
to
country.
Australia. How
Yeah.
did you get here? On a boat?
We came on a big ship. We actually ended up in Austria after my mother was sent from the Ukraine to Poland, to Yugoslavia, to all the different countries like many people were put into camps. They went through different stages of where they were looking for the Jews. So they stripped people naked so that they could check you over because Hitler wanted the perfect race. And anyone with any flaw in you, would you go that door, or which was to be gassed, or you would come out, if you were lucky, you went in the other door where we did go through.
So your mum, your family went there?
My whole family, from what my mother spoke to me and told me, that's what thousands of people went through.
Yeah.
Do you remember much of it?
No, because I was a year old, but I remember a little about Poland, very little. As a child, you think it's just normal life.
Yeah, right.
You don't really realise anything until they stood us in a big circle And I remember my older brother, he was 10 years older than me, so he would have been 11. So he saw a lot. He saw the Jews being shot, which affected him badly in later years. And my mother, she wasn't she wasn't educated. Her father never sent her to school because in her country it was important for her brothers, she had 4 brothers, to be educated, and they played an instrument and they were well educated and they were a close family. But Mum, you're going to be getting married, you're going to have to spin wool and knit and cook and dry the fruit and make the oils and do everything that a woman should have to do.
Sort of essential for life, really.
Yeah.
And that was
There's no
virtually...
education on that, apparently.
And so her father always taught her the Bible, read the Bible to them all. My mother was quite a Christian in her own way.
Right.
And she would always say, believe in the Lord and always be afraid of him. When we did anything wrong, she would always remind us, aren't you afraid of the Lord of what you just said?
Wow.
And that was the way we were brought up in our house. She was a kind woman. She would give you her last piece of bread. And when she baked, she would give it to her neighbours, whoever was around, they shared.
So
Even in Australia.
So you were born in the Ukraine, but you moved around?
Yes, and we ended up in
Poland.
Austria.
Oh, Austria.
Where I
Okay.
did go to school and learn German.
Okay.
And then my mother met another man because she knew my dad wasn't coming back.
Yeah.
My mother had 3 marriages. Her first husband died when he was only 29.
Oh.
And she was on her own for 3 years. And her younger brother said to her one day, her name was Elizabeth, but they called her Liz. Liz, have you thought of ever marrying again? She says, no, not really. She says her first love was her man.
Oh.
And she didn't think she would ever love again. And there was a friend that was of her brother. They used to all play cards together evenings. You know, that was what they did in those days. There wasn't no TV and nothing, so they would play cards. And there was one fella there that was rather fond of my mother. And her brother knew, but she didn't know. Because while she was spinning wool and putting the children to bed and washing the wooden floors on her hands and knees so that she could go and milk the cows next morning, her brother eventually said to her when she was left alone for 3 years, he says, do you realise, he says, that... Can't even remember his name now. I know his name was Fitz, the second name. Frederick, she says, is very fond of you. She says, no. She says, I haven't taken any notice. She says, well, who do you think chops your wood and brings the water and has everything ready when you come home from milking the cows? Oh, she says, I thought it was you, she says. You know, I thought, you know, her younger brother.
Spade work even back then, eh?
And anyway, somewhere along the line, they did get together. And she always said he was a wonderful, wonderful man. He was kind, good-hearted. And, of course, the war breaks up, but I was already born. They took all the men away, so I never knew my dad.
So that was your dad?
That's right. And my older brother, I said to him one day, did you like my dad? He says, yes. He says he was a good man.
Wow.
It makes me sad that I didn't know my father.
Oh, it's so sad. Yeah.
Even at the age of 83.
Wow.
Excuse me.
That's okay. Is Father's Day really difficult for you? You know how we have Father's Day over here?
My stepfather, he wasn't one for hugging or... He was a good man, don't get me wrong. She married in Austria a Russian man that lost his wife and children. And it was very sad in his life too. And so he was our father, but he didn't have that relationship that you would like to have.
Yeah.
He never ever did anything wrong or out of place. He was a hard-working man. And in them days, in 1949, when we came to this country, when you were put into camps, it was a very hard life because you were separated. The women were with the daughters and the men were with the boys.
Over here
Wow.
in Australia.
In the camps in Bonegilla in Victoria.
Why was that?
Because that's how it was. Because the government needed the population here to build this country.
Yeah.
And there was every nationality that you could possibly think of that had lost their homes in the war. They had nowhere to go. We could have stayed in Austria because Hitler kind of claimed his German people. But he couldn't because he was Russian. And because he had worked, because you either get a gun to your head, say you either work and we tell you what to do, or do you want the bullet? So what would you do?
Yeah.
Would you want to be shot, or would you work for them?
Yeah, he'd work.
So of course he was a driver for the Germans. He could never go back to his own country where his wife and his children were. He found out 35 years later from a cousin that his wife and his children were alive.
Oh, wow.
And he had a letter, his cousin in Canada said, I've got to tell you this, that your family is alive.
Oh.
He wanted to go back home, but his daughter said, please don't come, Dad. Leave things as it is. He was a grandfather.
Oh, wow.
His wife had had a stroke, and she said, Mum wouldn't know you anyway. She says, I'm taking care of her. So she says, please don't come. You'll make it worse for us. Stay, let it be as it is.
It's probably some good wisdom in there.
Yeah.
Wow.
So my mother gave him permission because she understood that his family was over there and he thought they were all dead. But anyway, so my younger brother, which was from this father,
Right.
he was going to get it all organised and do, ready for him with passports but he kind of listened to his daughter. She sent him photographs of the grandchildren and of them,
Wow, that's beautiful.
and that was 35 years later.
Wow.
Jeez, we
So-
can't even imagine a life where that's somewhat
That's
normal.
right.
So when you say you landed here and you were separated, you were your mum and your brothers with you.
In 1949, we came on an army ship. There was thousands of people brought this way from Naples in Italy. That's where we all had to go to on a train from Austria in Graz.
Wow.
And there was thousands of people. And because my younger brother at the stage, the baby brother, hadn't had the measles, they didn't want to let us on that ship at the time. So Mum had to go into a hospital where there was children with measles, but he never caught it. He seemed as if his body was immune. Right. So eventually they allowed us to go, and the name of the ship was Anna Zelena. I've got the papers of it, but I couldn't find them. I would have brought it to you. And so therefore there was thousands of people. There were army ships that had been bought and apparently fixed up to take all the migrants back and forth. And it tells you on this how many trips this ship had made with all the migrants that had come to this country. And then because they needed people here to make roads and to get life started.
Yeah. So this was in the...
in 1949.
End of the war.
Right.
That's right.
End of World War II, start of the Cold War.
So then you've got...
And
did you actually, in Austria, did you guys have to go through the concentration camps, did you say?
This was in I think in Poland and
Poland,
yes, in Poland where they were
Auschwitz, eh?
where they were looking for all the Jews.
Yeah.
Because in every country there was Jewish people.
Yeah.
And Mum said she can remember that the Jewish people were very clever. They were very smart.
Yeah.
they had a lot of knowledge. And when you went to the market like her mother did on a horse and wagon, and she said, I remember her 4 brothers and her would be waiting at home for Mum to come back. She'd start in the morning and arrive back late in the evening time, that she would bring all the bits from the market. So, of course, you couldn't go to shops and buy shirts and dresses like young people do. Everything was handmade. So she would buy the materials at the market from the stalls and come home with beautiful biscuits and beautiful chocolates or lollies. And they would never pass their recipes on to anybody because the Jewish people were very smart.
Right.
That's how they made money, and that's why Hitler wanted to destroy them. They were rich, they were wealthy, they had everything. They had gold, they had paintings, but they would never trade with anybody except their own. That was just the way they lived.
So when you
They were smart people.
How long was the boat ride?
6 weeks.
Wow.
And I know my poor mum, she was so seasick. She vomited every day because the ships weren't like you see now, these ships with a beautiful dining room. It was an army ship that had no stabilisers. It was, I was a child. To me, it was okay, but my older sister, Emma, she was looking after Mum and taking care of me to make sure that I was going to be all right. And then there was my young brother, Victor. Evald, he was with the men. That was my older brother, Caroline. She was my other sister. And Sasha, of course, was the one that died. So there were 6 children.
So 6 weeks to get here, you get to Victoria, and then you put in
You came to Melbourne.
Yeah.
And then they take buses to take you to the camps.
And they separated you?
No.
Oh.
You get separated in the camp.
Okay.
My brother had a breakdown because of what he'd seen in the war, and it reminded him all again when he came to Australia because of the separation from his family. He'd seen so much in the war with shooting the Jews, and he was frightened. He was the man now looking after Mum because that's how they sent us from our villages on a horse and wagon to put into these trains that had no windows, just like you see in the movies where they put all the Jews in and shut the doors. And that's how all the people in the war were taken from one place to the other. You didn't know where you were going, Mum says. My mother, she was a fantastic, beautiful person that you would never believed. She wasn't educated, but she kept her family together. She tied up a scarf with dried bread in her village and a suitcase, as the soldier said to her, tomorrow be ready. She says, went from house to house. You didn't know where you were going.
You just had to...
You just had to be ready and leave your home, your animals, whatever possession you had nothing. You left it all behind.
Unimaginable.
You just went with a suitcase and your children. And my mother, she was the most marvellous woman. She would never brag. She would always help. She was just how can I say, God was with her all the way.
Speaking of God, when did that sort of happen
was
for
all,
you?
Well, we never kind of was, how can I say, because Mum couldn't speak English, we lived in the camp. We went to Rosebud in Victoria, which was a farm 100 years old that my father had found, I don't know, through the agents, I would say. We had a suitcase when we went there. We had nothing to sleep on. We slept on straw until you could earn money to buy a bed.
So when you say you went to a farm, like...
That was already out of the camp after being in Bonegilla, in Rushworth and in Summers. They were all migrant camps.
Right.
And then you had to work under the government scheme for 2 years. If you went back to your country or wherever, you would have to pay for your fare coming and going. because the government, that's why brought you out, as they called you, the $20 bombs.
Right.
Europeans were brought for nothing, so you had to work here to make sure that you paid your way.
Yeah, that was 2 years was your visa. Your
That's right.
yeah, okay.
So eventually, as I say, we went to Rushworth, which another camp. Then there was Summers.
Is
that
this
was
all
the
in
last.
Victoria?
Yes. And then my father, I don't know how he found this farm. It was 100 years old. Through an agent, I was a child. I don't know exactly that part.
Right. How
but
old were you reckon?
I was 9.
9. Oh, yeah.
But I always had to, we had to speak for our mother because she couldn't speak English. I broke my arm in the camp and they took me away for 8 weeks. My mother thought they'd kidnap me.
8 weeks?
8 weeks.
For a
I've got
broken
the
arm.
proof of my scar where they cut me because the bone had splintered.
Wow.
Kidding.
And it took 8 weeks to heal. My mother thought, my God, what have they done with her? Where have they taken her? She couldn't speak a word. She just went to the office every day. When is my girl coming back? What have you done with my little girl?
Oh, my Lord.
And eventually they brought me back. But I do remember being in hospital, but I don't know where it was. It was somewhere in Melbourne
Wow.
because in the camps they didn't have the facilities.
Right.
I just remember an ambulance taking me. I was in a lot of pain. Mum couldn't come along. They just said to her, when she's better, they'll bring her back. And that was just how it was. But you know what? I learned to speak English while I was in hospital because I had no one else to speak to. And a child, when they're young, pick up language much quicker.
Do you remember like missing your mum, wanting to go home?
Of course I did. Of course I did.
What was that like?
It was heartbreaking because I had no visitors. I had no one.
family?
Nothing.
And I was in terrible pain when they did this operation. I remember waking up in a cot. They'd put me in a cot and I was all alone in a room with nobody else. And I just cried and cried. And until somebody came to me eventually and they had to redo that plastering again because it was on too tight.
Oh, wow.
And they left a gap open to always to clean the wound out because it was not, it was pussing.
Yeah.
It wasn't going right. And it's amazing how children adapt and what you have to do.
So when you left the camp, you're on a farm, you said?
We went on a farm.
To work on the farm?
No, this is what we were renting.
Wow.
My father had to walk to work. He was working on the council by then. I've skipped a bit. While he was in camp, he was taken with a bus to work. We only saw him weekends. Wow. All the men that were taken from the camp, women stayed there, men were taken on the camp. The men were taken where was a Puckapunyal. That was I remember the army camp where my father worked.
Right.
And then he would come back. My older brother was sent to Mildura, grape picking. And he couldn't stand the heat. He couldn't speak English. And when he came back, he was very depressed and he cried. He was 19. And she said, "What's wrong, Ewald?" And he says, "Mummy says, I'm scared of something and I don't know how to tell you. I'm afraid." The war came back to him.
Right.
Everything started to come back to him, what he'd seen in the war, and he thought being put into a camp like we were, it came all back to him. He was a beautiful human being. I've got a picture of him as 19. He stands with his mate. He had a girlfriend in Austria. He was working. He was starting his life after the war. And then to come to Australia, it all broke his whole life up again.
And was there rumours of wars? Was the news all about the potential of the war coming and the Cold War? And
I think it was because you weren't together. Like you couldn't speak English. There was every nationality in the camp, so everyone was strangers to each other.
They couldn't even communicate if they wanted
Well,
to.
unless you found someone that you knew that you could communicate. You know, if it was a German or a Russian or Yugoslav or whatever, if you found someone, yes, you communicated. But otherwise, you were all in the same boat. There was a big kitchen. If there was food left, well, you got some. If there wasn't, then it was. If you were too late, you didn't get any. I can remember always these tins of jam being on the table, which was something marvellous for a child because we never got jam, you know, in Austria. So to eat, I can still remember this jam always, and I used to take a spoon and eat it, thinking this is just wonderful, you know, as a child of 9 years old.
Wow.
But look,
So when you moved to the farm, you're growing up. What was life for you outside the camp?
we lived there a short time because it was very sandy soil. I remember my parents talking, how are we going to survive? The tanks all had holes in them. And there was I don't know where my father got the concrete from, but he was concreting these water tanks so that we could fill up with water. The house was very old. It had nothing in it. There was fruit trees that needed pruning. That was the grass growing everywhere. The bracken that was growing there was as tall as me. If I went in it,
bracken?
you wouldn't see.
What's bracken?
Bracken is something like that grows like a weed.
Oh, just big, tall grass, weedy.
Well, it wasn't grass. It was very hard to get out. Horrible stuff. But it was very sandy soil, and my father always thought, well, you know, we'll make a go of it. You know, he lent a horse from the farmer that was not far from us.
Borrowed a horse
to plough the field, but it didn't want to grow because we had no water. It was so sandy. Right. Soil was so different to what it was in their own country. The soil in their country was rich and wonderful for growing everything. Here, nothing wanted to grow. And they said, what kind of country have we come to? So all he could grow, and he dug a great big hole that my sister and I used to go and throw a bucket in that we pulled up with a rope. We never went on out by ourselves in case one of us would fall in. We always went in pairs so that we could water the gardens, one little cup of everything on a plant. Wow. Because there was nothing there. It was a hard road, and I often think, how did my mother ever survive with the hardship? A child adapts.
Yeah, that's true.
It's different, but for adults, when I think, how did she ever adapt? But there was thousands of us that went through those years, and I suppose we survived the war.
So did you end up going to school here?
I did. I went to a school which was hard. They had to put me into a lower class because of learning the English alphabet. And I always felt very, very out of it. And my parents couldn't help me because they couldn't read and write. And my sisters, they learned actually English through reading comics. That was how by seeing the pictures and reading the little things that comics had.
That's really cool.
Yes, it's amazing, and that's how they learnt English. They never went to school, but they managed to teach themselves how to write and read in English. And they all spoke German and Ukrainian or Russian. It was much the same. There was just a few words, that are different. My sister ended up, Emma, she worked away at Rosebud, at a motel, but she couldn't come back home every day because there was no vehicles.
Right.
And we lived quite a long way from, the shopping area. So I walked 2.5 miles to school every day through sandy tracks that were absolutely bush everywhere, and I was terrified, but there was no other way until I came to the main street. There was all some farmers, like pig farmer and a vegetable farmer, and call us whatever you like because we were only beginning. Wow. We had a cow, we had a few chooks and a few ducks, and that's how we lived. And it was a hard life. And Mum and my middle sister Caroline, they would be home, and my little brother Victor. Even at that stage, the older brother was in Adelaide. That's where they had sent him. And my mother worried about him deeply because she couldn't write. We had no phones. And she managed somehow, I really don't know that point, but she managed somehow to find out where he was and asked him to come home, that we now had a place for him to stay. And he came home, but he couldn't live a normal life. He was a beautiful human being, but my stepfather didn't have a lot of patience with him. If you couldn't work and you weren't strong enough, then you're no good to me.
And was he not able to work?
He couldn't cope. To look at him, he was a beautiful human being, but he could not mentally cope what he'd gone through as a young boy, and it all came back to him when he came to this country.
Wow.
And it happened to many, many Europeans. The mental hospitals were full of people that had breakdowns, and I went with my mother. We all took our turn as we grew up to go from Rosebud to Sunbury, which was a long way to travel. You caught a bus, then you went on a train, and then you caught another train until you got to Sunbury in Victoria.
Is that where the hospital?
And it was full of mental people, and a lot of them were Europeans. They were trying medication out, and I remember my mother getting a telegram just to come urgently that her son was very ill and may not make it. And she went. And this is where Christianity came in. My mother never gave up on him. She took him food and fed him because they had given up on him.
Wow.
He was pooed himself, wet himself. Nobody changed him. They'd just left him on a mattress. And my mother said, "Why are you doing this to my son?" She says, "He's laying here," she says, "in this mess." She cleaned him up and she dressed him, and she took and went every day. I never saw my mum from early hours till evening.
Wow.
And she saved him by feeding him. They'd given up on him. And
Why didn't she bring him home? Just wasn't allowed?
She couldn't.
Right.
He was too ill.
Yeah.
And there was no way.
So you went through was it just a local school, a little
Yeah,
school,
there was a little school, yes,
type
that
thing?
was in Rosebud, where I went to school, where I walked 2.5 miles every day to school. And how can I say, I wasn't a real smart kid, but I did the best. I learned to read, to write. I had no one at home.
So what was your first job after school then?
We moved to another place from the farm eventually, which was at Red Hill. We bought a little house.
Red Hill. That's still Victoria, isn't it?
That's right, a little house, and it was there was a lot of European people around there,
Right.
Yugoslav, Polish. We were German, and my father was Russian. My stepfather. There was like a little Europe, if you could call it, where people had all bought a home or built their home, and the school wasn't far, and it was a consolidated school out in the country, Red Hill, where there was all apples and cherries.
Beautiful.
It was a beautiful place because it gave us, on weekends or when the season was for fruit, to go and pick fruit.
I tell you, when a country allows people to buy land and have their own home, that means you can.
It means a lot
prosper.
because of what they had lost.
Yeah. So
And just to have your own bit of land.
You
And
must have been working hard to get a house.
my mother never spent money.
Right.
We never wasted money. Everything you ate off what you had,
Right.
off your animals. You baked your own bread. My mother used to walk 2.5 miles to buy flour, sugar, coffee, tea. We had butter, we had milk, we had cream, we had eggs. All the things that you only need. And I can remember her telling me a story. She went with a Ukrainian lady to a butcher shop, and they wanted a pig's head, and they couldn't speak English. And they were trying very hard to tell this butcher that they wanted this and half. And the butcher was looking at them and saying, I don't understand you. And they're both saying to each other, what a stupid man.
Did they ask him to leave the eyes on so that it saw them through the week?
And eventually he understood them. And he says, I know what you want. And he'd gone to the back, brought this pig's head out, and they both went, yes, 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 this is what we wanted. So they said, but we only want a half. They kept going. So he says, oh, okay, because this woman wanted a half a pig's head, and so did my mother. And it was to make brawn.
Right.
And of course, it was quite a laugh years later how we always remembered how they got this pig's head, you know, and they had to show because they couldn't speak the language.
So you moved to a little house
To Red Hill.
and then did you get a job? What did you do for work?
No, I went to school up there too.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And eventually when I was 14, in them days, there was no high school nearby. You didn't have the vehicles to, people like they have now, cars and buses and all that. That just wasn't available. So the school teacher said to me, he must have told them in the cafeteria. It had 500 children in that school, and there was a lovely big cafeteria, and where children could buy their lunch because they came from all these little towns all over the place, Merricks and Flinders and God knows there were so many. They were all farmers with orchardists and all kinds of people, but they were small farms. And children came from everywhere on buses. There was about 500 children at that school, a consolidated school. I didn't live very far away from there. I could walk, but lots of other children didn't. So when they knew I was going to leave school, they offered me a job in the cafeteria.
Nice.
That there was a girl leaving and they needed somebody there. Would I be interested in helping to make lunches? And it was done in a big way. They did soups and ordered. In them days, the bread wasn't sliced. You had a big bread slicer where the bread had to be sliced and the cheese had to be sliced. Cheese came in big blocks.
Right.
Kraft cheese. The kids loved the slices. Tomatoes had to be cut. There was lunches made for whoever put an order in. And it was a big school. Soups were cooked.
So
we
you
had
got a
pies
job
and
there?
Yeah, and I got a job there.
Wow, that's
and that
amazing.
was at walking distance. And it was a wonderful job, I loved it until I went with my girlfriend to visit somebody in Mornington. And I think you know Mornington.
Wow. That's where my cousins live.
And, of course, they went to visit a family. And she said to me, my mum and dad are going down to visit somebody. She says, I'm going to be bored to tears. Do you want to come down with me? I was 17. So that was the day I met my husband.
Wow.
And it was in the most unusual way. He was an Englishman. And we went for a walk because we were bored with the adults talking. And we went for a walk and a car stopped. And Elizabeth knew one of the fellas. She says, oh, hello, Carl, because her parents were visiting his sister. It was just coincidence. God put him in my way. And he said, I couldn't see you. He said, I could only see so much of you. He says, because we were standing outside the vehicle and he was on the other side. He was the passenger and Carl was driving. He was a German boy and my husband was great friends with him. They lived opposite each other in the same street and they'd gone for a ride. So Carl says, do you girls want to come for a ride? So Elizabeth says, yeah, that'd be good, she says. He
Better
says,
than walking.
yeah. So we went down towards the pier and had a little, and then Carl said, look, he says, do you want to come back to our place? He says, Mum won't mind. She said, she'll probably give you tea. Stay there and have some tea. And she was cooking rabbit. They were German people. Beautiful rabbit she made. I can still taste that. So, of course, across the road where my husband lived from Carl, he had a sister. So they called her over, and there was another boy in the car his name was Petrus. He was Latvian. So there was all nationalities.
That's the first youth group.
So we went back to Carl's house, and the mother said, you're welcome, come and eat, help yourself to the rabbit that she put on the plate. And we thought it was wonderful. And she says to Carl, we'll leave you kids, like we were teenagers, 17, 19, 20. Play some records, she says, and enjoy yourself. Put some rock and roll on. And that was the beginning of my relationship with my husband.
Wow. How long after that did you get married?
3 years.
Wow.
2 years and I got engaged. I was 17. By 19, his mother said, isn't it about time you two got engaged?
Okay.
So I thought, well, okay, she must approve of me. Apparently my husband told me later, he says, all the girls I'd brought home she wasn't too keen on. He says, you were the first one, so you were lucky.
Because you loved the rabbit.
It wasn't Carl that I married, it was Darryl. He was an Englishman.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Because Carl, he apparently had his eye on me, I was told later. And Darryl says, well, we'll see. This is the conversation the two boys had.
There you go.
And we left it at that. But anyway.
So you got married, did you move to Mornington?
Eventually I got married there, yes, from Red Hill.
Beautiful.
And I was at 20 when I married my husband.
Wow.
And, so he was virtually the only man that I went with. Right. I'd gone out with groups when I was 17 to dances and different things with the country at Red Hill, that we had country dances. But I'd never gone steady with any boy, and he was the only one.
Did you have, where was the whole God thing in all this?
Where was what?
God.
God, in our house, my mother would always remind us. I went to Sunday school.
Right, okay.
Even
over here in Australia?
Here in Australia. That was when I was a young girl.
Yeah.
The little community where we lived, we would walk to the church to go to Sunday school.
Okay.
But I never really understood it all properly.
Was it English?
It was English. It was just a small church where all the country people went. And how can I say, but at home, my mother would always say to us just different things that she always spoke to us. It was always godly things. Because she couldn't read a Bible, but she knew her 10 Commandments.
Right.
That her father had taught her, and she always said, when we did wrong, always reminded us, don't you fear the Lord?
So then when you were married, did that change much for you? Did you start?
My husband's family weren't really churchgoers, right. But they did believe in the Lord, but it was never spoken of. It wasn't something that was there. They were English people. They lived a different life to what I was brought up in. We had a lot of respect for our parents. We never would walk in front of our parents in bathers or in a nightie, especially suppose because I had a stepfather.
Right.
We always showed respect, that Mum would always say, when it's time to go to bed, she says, and you've got your nightdress on, you stay in there. And that was just how we were brought up, that you never paraded around without clothes or with, a nightie was always long sleeves and down to the floor.
Right.
So that was just how we were brought up.
Right.
When you when your mother would say, "Don't you fear the Lord," what language would she say that in?
In flat German, Plattdeutsch.
Can you say it in Plattdeutsch now?
Well, how can I say? It's many years. My mother's been dead now for 26 years. She died when near when Princess Diana died.
Oh,
2
wow.
weeks before.
No way.
And I always remember that because I was driving up to Arthur's Seat with some girlfriends at my age. Well, they were friends that I've known for a long time, and we all went out somewhere because they wanted to make me feel better with, kind of losing my mother. She knew how close I was. I looked after my mum for 10 years with a stroke.
Wow.
And then I never, ever gave up. And I had a sick brother too. When mother couldn't do it no more, then it was my turn to give my life to and devote my time. So I looked after my mum and my sick brother. My brother was in after he came out of the hospital, the mental hospital, because that's where they put people, even when they shouldn't be there. He was then in a hostel, that's right, in Seaford. So I would take my mother there. We always took him clothing and food and because he smoked tobacco, things that Mum wanted to, so that he would never feel that he was forgotten. That was such an important thing. She did Christian things in her own way,
Right.
if you know what I mean. She did some beautiful things that even Christians don't do today.
Yeah, right. So
And that's and that's how I remember my mum.
Wow.
And I had to be with her because Mum couldn't read and write. So no matter what she ever needed in her life, she would find someone, God would put it in her way, to write letters or to get her where she needed to get, that she would never, ever forget anyone. I'll tell you another story. I've got so many stories to tell you. You have no idea. My sister Emma had a son that we kept in touch with too, because something happened, I won't go into detail, that he was put into jail at an age of 17 because he had a German father that was very, very strict on him and was not a kind man, not to my sister or to the children. He was really a German that should have been Hitler. That was the type of man he was. Yeah. And he was brought up in that stage of his life where he wasn't a warm person. But he worked hard. He was a builder. And in them days, builders did things from scratch, to the finish of building a house. It wasn't just putting up a frame and then someone else comes and does something else,
the whole thing.
because that's how he was taught from his father in Germany. But anyway, he was hard on his older son,
Right.
Peter. And something happened where he had to go to jail. And we kept in touch with him, my mum and me, because he didn't want to be associated with him anymore. So my sister lost touch with him, but we did it for her. She was up in Cairns and we were down in Mornington.
Wow.
And she would get me to write the letters or someone to keep in touch with him because he became an artist. And he became very religious
Right.
in the prison.
Oh, wow.
And he was in there for, 12 years?
Wow.
Oh, goodness.
And it was through I will tell you what happened so you don't think the wrong thing of him. It was to do with drugs and two boys that were messing around, playing with a rifle.
Wow.
This other boy, my sister had moved away to Cairns. They'd left him behind because his dad didn't want to bother with him anymore, and he left him to us. But he wanted to follow them. So he followed them, hitchhiking up to Queensland. Eventually came to some farm, and they had a son. And they were playing with this rifle,
Wow.
pointing it at each other.
Wow.
So, of course, the other boy got shot.
How many kids did you have?
I had
Martha?
one.
One.
a special one.
Wow.
I
What
waited
age were
9
you?
years,
Wow.
and it was not because I couldn't have children. It was my choice because I had a lot to do in my life.
Right. Well,
And my
looking
life
after
was
nephews
until
and-
I was ready to have a child and give him a roof over his head and to be able to do the right things.
Wow.
But I looked after my mum for
Yeah.
15 years with a stroke.
Did she actually live with you?
She lived with me for 10 years until my husband said, I think it's time you found your mum somewhere. And that broke my heart. But then the 5 years I went every day,
Wow.
and I mean every day, to see her because of her language barrier, to take her out and keep her alive and to keep her mind alive by taking her shopping, put her in a wheelchair, I'd fold it up, take it, put it and take her. It's when you do something from the heart and you want to do it, nothing is hard.
Yeah. Very beautiful.
And so that was the life that we led. And I had my own family at home and I lived by the clock. It's amazing. I sometimes think, how did I ever do it? I lived just by getting up early, having my organised. I used to go and see my sick brother, bring his clothes home, wash them, take him cigarettes, and do all the things that Mum wanted me to do, because she always said, what will happen to Ewald when I can't do it no longer? I said, I promise you, Mum, I will always look after him.
Wow. That's amazing.
Forgive me. Because he was a wonderful brother and he had such a sad life. Such a sad life.
So you were looking after him and your mum
Yes.
at the same time?
I
pretty
wanted to
much.
keep my promise to her.
Wow.
My sisters were all too far away and I was the only one, and my husband kept saying, why is it you? I said, because God put me here for that reason.
Yeah.
I said, there's no one else. I said, and Mum needs me. She can't do it anymore. I said, now it's my turn. So, yes,
Wow.
it's amazing what we can do when we have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, God gives you strength, and I thought there was never enough hours in a day. But, you know, I got through it,
Yeah.
and I had my own family. So when I think about it all now that I'm nearly 83, I think, how did I do it?
Wow, I bet.
And people complain sometimes about what they have to do, and I think to myself, my God,
Yeah.
there are so many hours. If you really want to do it, you will do it.
Yeah.
And you will make time. So I used to, my older brother ended up with a stroke as well after my mother had, and I had to find a place for him. And at least it was closer by so that I could visit Mum for so long, and then she would say to me, go and see your brother and make sure you take him fresh fruit and get his clothes and take him a cigarette because he loved to have a smoke. So I would take him in the garden and sit in the garden with him while he had a cigarette, and I'd, tell him, that his washing was in the drawer, and I'd pick up his other washing to take home to wash. And that was my routine for years and years, back and forth. I had to give up my friends. I had to give up many things that I perhaps did before. But, it was all worth it, and I'd do it all again.
Wow. That's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
That's a real sacrificial love, eh?
And we can all do it.
Wow.
We can all do it.
So then when your son came along, did you have to take him with you along the way type thing?
My son sometimes came along with him, and he learned and he knew.
Yeah.
He knew, and that's where he learned what was going on, what Mum had to do. And my husband was a little bit not quite so understanding.
Right.
He came from a different family to what I did. But he was still a good man. I was married for 60 years.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
for 60 years, and I
Did
do
he
miss
pass
him.
away? Did he pass away?
He passed away 3.5 years ago.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I miss him
Yeah.
because Andrew met Christina and he followed her up here.
Yeah.
We lived in Mornington.
And your mum, you said, passed away 26.
26 years ago, just before Princess Diana.
Right. Is your brother still alive?
No, my brother died before her. I forgot to tell you that. That's, I think, why my mum in the end gave in. She lived for him because he had nobody. And she just wanted to be there to make sure that I was doing my job for him, that I was visiting and looking after him and doing all the things that I had to do. And, you know, the day before my brother died, I was there and he was so happy and he asked about everybody because my younger brother had 7 children.
Wow.
He had 6 daughters and 1 son. And he's gone now too. He died a year ago. He was the youngest. And I've got so much to tell. I had a sister that died that I love dearly, Caroline. She died at the age of 64. She had cancer, lymphoma. And she would give you her heart as well. She had very little, but if you ever went there, she would put the spread on whatever she had and made you welcome. Wow. And that was what we learned from our mother, that no matter whoever came to our home, there was always a table full to share.
Yeah, it's so good. I love what you shared before. When you see what people complain about having to do these days.
That's right.
I think your life is a beautiful story and testimony, and a challenge for people. I can't fathom. I'm born on the Gold Coast, 1990.
We just have to be unselfish.
Yeah.
And that's what it all comes in.
Yeah, Marshall.
It's making time. Instead of thinking, well, I've got, other arrangements. I'm going out for dinner or for tea, or I want to go shopping. I'm going to the pictures, or there's a dance on. Put that person first, the one that has nothing, that is laying in a nursing home or in a hospital, or someone that you are looking after at home. Right. Let it never be too much. My husband, he wasn't a carer in that way, and he always said, I don't know how you do it, caring for me. I could never do what you do for me. I says, yes, you would. I said, we have to walk in somebody's shoes to know what they really go through. You will never know. I used to look at the people in a nursing home. I sat with my mother for 13 days and nights before she died.
Wow.
And nursing homes, they look good, but you know what? I saw so much of it
it's not a nice
that it isn't what you think it is. No, heating is turned off at night. It's cold. I remember sitting there with my sister Caroline. We had blankets around us to keep warm.
Wow.
Yet when you walk into a nursing home, they've got heaters on, they've got coolers on in the day, but everything at night is turned off. And I can remember my mother falling through the glass window when I came in one morning and they warned me, don't get a fright that your mum had a fall. And I said, how could that happen? And then I noticed that her switch had been turned off. So when she pressed her thing, her light wasn't coming on at the door, to say, I need you.
Oh, no.
So
and I said to my mum, I said, how did this happen, Mum, in my language? She says, because nobody came. She says, I wanted to go to the toilet. She says, so I made myself get up, and because she couldn't feel one side of her, the stroke, she lost her balance. She wanted to go onto the commode, which stood near a window, and of course she lost her balance and went through it. Luckily, the glass was made so that it would buckle, but not shatter. Right. But she hurt herself badly. She was bruised badly. I mean, she was 89 when she died.
Wow.
But she shouldn't have died then because they helped her.
Yeah.
Well, it's an amazing story. It's amazing. We maybe have to
do a part 2.
Yeah, that's
do a
all
part
right.
2 one
Oh,
day. It's awesome. But thank you so much,
that's all right.
Martha. Thank you for sharing and also passing it on to your son and then your grandson. I
Yes.
see a lot of you in them, to be honest.
Yes, well, I hope so.
Which is
I hope so. I hope they've learned something.
I'm sure. Well, I've learned something.
Yeah, I have today as well.
Well,
Yeah.
But thank you so much for your time.
I used to often see people and I used to think to myself, you know, things that they were going through when you just sit and watch in a nursing home and nobody knows these people that are there. They've been mums and dads, grandmas and granddads, and they've all done something in their life special.
It's true.
But people look at them as much as if they're nothing.
Yeah, it's very sad.
And the time that you can give to a human and sit and just hold their hand, even if they can't talk, you're doing something very special because they feel important, that they're not forgotten.
It's true.
Oh, wow.
It's very good.
That's an amazing reminder. Hey, it's powerful, Martha.
Yes, it is.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Session 1 done.
Session 1 done. We'll book in session 2
I think we need
at another day.
Well, who knows? You might be bored to tears. Who knows?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No way.
Cool.
I really appreciate your
But yes, there are so many stories my mother used to tell us, and they were wonderful stories. And her actions were louder than, as I say, it was just the way my mother was that I learned so much from her.
That's awesome. Oh, we think you're
So good.
amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good.